Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Vets to PM Military Transition Academy podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Misty Marino. This podcast is dedicated to helping military service members and veterans achieve a meaningful and lucrative post-service career. We cover a wide range of topics from project management certifications to the DoD SkillBridge program and everything in between. In today's episode, we're joined by Paul Pantani, a powerhouse in the world of transition guidance. As a business consultant, retired law enforcement leader, and the host of the Transition Drill podcast, Paul is dedicated to helping first responders and military veterans navigate the challenging shift from service to civilian life. The Transition Drill podcast has become a vital resource for those in uniform who are ready to transition, offering stories that dig deep into the realities of change. With Paul's unique perspective from his 3 decades in law enforcement, the podcast provides both practical advice and inspiring insights into staying mentally and physically strong through career shifts. In today's conversation, we'll hear directly from Paul on how to prepare today for your transition tomorrow. Let's dive in. Welcome, Paul, to the show. It is so awesome to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Briefly. So I spent virtually my entire adult life in law enforcement. I was working for a police department within 6 months of graduating from high school. And I spent 35 years there, retired at the end of last year, retired at the rank of commander. In that time, did all aspects: patrol, field training officer, SWAT, bike patrol, detective, promoted up to the rank of commander at my final agency. And just had not to sound cliche, I just had a fun time. It was actually a fun 35 years.
That's awesome. So you say, not to sound cliche, but I just had a really fun time. So I talk to veterans all the time about their careers, and I often hear the same thing. So I'd love to understand from your point of view, what classifies a fun time? Why don't you tell us, a few things that really made your 35 years fun?
In the beginning, it's working shift work. As weird as this sounds, it's developing that relationship, kind of that crew mentality when you're stuck working Friday night graveyards or whatever it is. You develop a bond with those people, and it's something that you really kind of carry with you through your entire career. The fun calls, it's, again, not to sound cliche, but the randomness of which you could go from this call to this, it's this up and down. Yeah, there are some traumatic calls that you go to. You see the horrendous side of society and what they can do to each other as human beings. But at the same token, you end up at that party call where you've got somebody that you recognize as maybe a pillar of the community, but they're a little tipsy and they're just being funny,
Yeah.
and it's that randomness. To the tail end of my career, what made it fun was I came to the promotional ladder later in my career. It wasn't something that when I started, I really had a desire for. It wasn't a motivation of mine. For me, it was always kind of that I want to be a good worker bee. I want to just be in the middle of it all. And then I got tapped on the shoulder and like, hey, you really need to think about promoting. So I promoted, spent the last 8 years of my career moving up. And where it became fun then was really seeing my ability to not only have an impact on my organization, because now I was at the big table. Now I was in those meetings where if something was kind of going left, I could voice my opinion and say, hey, what about this? The other thing was, after a while, you have to realize that your primary responsibility is training up the person who's going to take your job. You don't have to be in a quote unquote leadership position for it. We're all in that position. Every one of us is preparing for our transition away from these careers. We need to be preparing those who are coming up to do the best job they can and to be the best members of that organization. And so having that ability to be in the rear with the gear, but realizing that I'm the one helping to make sure that they get everything they need so that they can go do a great job. So that's where the fun switched for me.
Absolutely. And I always say when you do work that matters, the bad times that obviously we all endure and experience are not as remarkable as the good times. And so 35 years you were doing some work that matters. So now you've transitioned, so you've
Yes.
retired and now you are a civilian, right? So a lot of parallels from the military to law enforcement. So why don't you tell us about the work that you're doing now that matters to you?
The work that matters to me most is my podcast.
Yeah. And
It's
so on your podcast, you help people prepare today for their transition tomorrow. So tell us a little bit about that.
I kicked the podcast off actually 3 years ago. I was still active in my previous career when I started it. It came as an in-house project that we kind of started developing at my organization, to where basically those that had retired and moved on to something other than law enforcement or than just simply retiring, they went and did something in the corporate world. And what we were creating was a network of people that could be a source of information. So as somebody was coming towards their retirement, they could be somebody they could reach out to and go, hey, what do I need to worry about? And it just kind of grew from there. I got some offline comments of, man, that would really be a good podcast. And that's where it kind of stemmed from. And then quickly I realized that the veteran community and the first responder community share the same aspect in that
Oh yeah.
we're lured in on the front end with, man, look at all the cool things you get to do. Look at
Yeah.
all this stuff you get to do. But at the back end, when it's time to walk out the door, it's pretty much, hey, there's the door. It was good knowing you. Here's your going away prize, and have fun. Granted, military side, you've got TAPS, you've got Skill Bridge. So there are a little things in place. But the one thing that I've learned in talking to my guests over the last 3 years, unless you're clearly decided on what you want to do when you leave the military, it's almost kind of, yeah, let me just sit here and check the box and move on. And so with the podcast, it became important for me just to allow a variety of stories to be put out there of people who had made their transition. Some struggled, some had a game plan and it went according to plan. Some had a game plan and it didn't go according to plan. But it's that every one of them, the key thing is they kept pushing forward.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like one foot in front of the other. And, I always say you learn a lot more in the valley than on top of the mountain. And, I would classify my military transition as very smooth and successful. Everything went according to plan. And I even retired during the pandemic. So, surprisingly, I actually did not have a lot of, issues or face a lot of obstacles, but that's not always the story. So let's talk through your transition. So I know that you ended your career after 35 years as a commander. So obviously there's a lot of credibility, that you had, and now you're out. And so tell us how you prepared. How do you feel? Any lessons learned? Any big epiphanies? Or maybe, oh man, I should have done that differently.
I'll take it back early in my career. So I worked for two law enforcement agencies. I worked for a local police department, and then I worked for a district attorney's office. For those who aren't familiar with a DA's office, it's a glorified detective bureau. We have every aspect of a traditional law enforcement agency except a patrol function. That's the only difference. Early in my career, like I said, promoting wasn't a priority to me. I worked for an agency that did not have permanent detectives. I found fraud by accident and found that I really liked it. And one of the things that quickly jumped out at me was, this is something I could do in retirement. So at about the midway point of my career, my thought process was, I'm going to take this fraud thing as far as it can go. And then that's going to be my retirement job. I was starting to make those contacts 20 years ago with the banking side of the house, the insurance companies, figuring that when the time was right, I could then start, hey, so-and-so, hey, so-and-so, hey, so-and-so. If you hear of anything open, let me know. While I'm in that position with my first agency, all of a sudden, the junior guys start coming up and you start going to yourself, man, I'm not going to work for him or her. And we've all been there. We understand,
Oh,
everybody
yeah.
knows what I'm talking about. And so I tested for the first promotional rank at my first agency, which was corporal, ended up number 2 on the list. And so where I saw myself was at that point, almost 15 years in, I was going to now be the junior corporal back working weekend night shift. That just didn't sound appealing to me. So I left and went to the DA's office. What it gave me was Monday through Friday with weekends and holidays off. I still continued with that mentality of, oh, I'm just going to kind of keep immersing myself in this fraud stuff. Then I get tapped on the shoulder. Hey, you need to think about promoting. So I promoted up, and that's when the new window opened, or if you almost kind of like the curtains got slammed open, because what it did for me was it really opened up other opportunities. And it was kind of, in a weird way, almost from a transitional perspective, almost a bad thing, because it opened my eyes to so many potentials that I really then didn't know, oh, wow, where am I going to go now? And so I still kind of stayed in that fraud realm, thinking that, oh, I'll just get into like a director position. And what I found, though, was as I was into the last year of my career and started putting out applications, one of the big things they want is that internal experience. So even though you bring a lot to the table, leadership, you bring the ability to investigate cases, all that kind of stuff, you didn't work in the corporate world. And that ended up actually kind of being a stickler for me. Fortunately, I had been planning. I tried to make sure that everything, and I refer to this as all of my peripherals, were taken care of. So basically, by the time I came to my retirement, my only monthly payment was my house payment and then just general utilities. So I was in a fortunate position that I didn't have to take a job. And I really kind of took the mindset that if I come to the thing that works for me, I'll take it. For those who are kind of familiar with the Southern California area, I'm about an hour north of San Diego, but I'm an hour and a half from downtown LA with no traffic. And that's it Sunday at 2:00 in the morning. What I found also was I didn't want to relocate and I didn't want to live out of a suitcase. So that really started limiting my options. And so I went down and said, you know what I'll do? I'll start my own company. I'll start a consulting business that I can work from home. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but that's brought its own issues. So in the grand scheme of things, if I could wrap it up in a small bubble, my transition went well in that I'm enjoying now almost a year retired, but nothing that I thought would happen has happened yet. If that sounds
Yeah, I
weird.
mean, it's unfortunately it's the story for a lot of people. And one good thing is most of us are resilient enough to one, identify that there's probably going to be a lot of change and a lot of adversity along the way, and two, how to navigate that change. And most of us are familiar with how to do that. But a couple key things that I heard in your transition story, and this is one thing that we at Vets to PM we preach a lot. It's really all about the community and the network. And so you started networking and building your community early on. And I do think that we underestimate the value of a community and network. It's not just about, us withdrawing from that network, but it's us depositing, us establishing this relationship. And you just never know when you're going to see these people or need these people, or when they're going to, need you. And then I loved when you said taking care of the peripherals. So, these are some things that my husband and I did right before we retired. We looked at other life insurance stuff. We looked at what TRICARE would cost us. We looked at other medical benefit packages. We looked at vision. Is it worth getting a vision package if we never go to the eye doctor? We also looked at location. We looked at cost of living and taxes and stuff like that. And the biggest question that we're always asked is, hey, how early should I start preparing? And I know that you have a couple opinions about this, but knowing what I know now, I always think, because civilians have to do this too, we always have to sort of be prepared, not ready, because I don't like that word, but we have to be prepared for what could happen. The next step, right? The layoff, the family emergency, whatever it may be. So taking care of a lot of those peripherals where you only have a mortgage and your normal bills, that probably helped you. And then just having the freedom to not say yes to everything because you have this scarcity mindset. You know, us that retire, yes, we're privileged. We have a different, you know, we have an advantage. We've worked hard for that advantage, but we have an advantage. And I love the fact that you're just, you know, filling everyone else's cup with your podcast. So let's talk about some transition tips that are universal for law enforcement, for the military, even for civilians who go from one career to the next. So what would be like your first tip?
Something that you said that I really want to key on, that we need to be thinking about with these careers. The one difference, and I really admire, almost in a weird way, admire this about the military, is the military forces you to reevaluate your life every 4 to 6 years. From the first responder side of the community, we don't have that. Anything that is going to be life-changing in the sense of stepping away or continuing this career is on you. Because for the most part, you sign on day one, and then they put that in a file, and they go, okay, we'll pull this back out in 20 years or 30 years, whatever it is at your retirement, and we'll give you your retirement check. Whereas in the military, every 4 to 6 years, hey, do you want to keep doing this? Is this what you want to do? Does this work with your life? And you have to make that decision. Do I stay? Do I go? What you said, though, is really important in that even if your plan is to do 20 years, to do a full career and then retire, unfortunately, the one thing that both of these careers bring is the potential that tomorrow will literally be tomorrow. Unplanned, an injury. From the first responder side of it, it's 2024. Everything we do is on camera.
Yeah.
You know, I hate to say this, but we do silly things. And so,
where there's there's error, right? Unfortunately, what we're living in this camera era, and we're living in this cancel culture. And I mean, you know, first responders obviously deal with it at such a different level than most, but we're not allowed to have a bad day in public, but even in private. I mean, our phones record everything. You press send by accident and now you're done. So totally understand it. But proceed. Sorry.
Just a real brief side note, and I want to bring an analogy that I'm hoping a lot will be able to understand. When you look back at the Vietnam War era and those military members who came home and they faced such harsh criticism and response from the community, similar to what we're kind of seeing now in the first responder community. What was the catalyst? Vietnam was the first war where people sitting at dinner could turn the news on and see what was going on. And they're like, oh, that's what war is like. What they didn't realize before then, it was almost kind of that out of sight, out of mind. Just go take care of business. Law enforcement, military, there's no way to make war, doing police work, look pretty on camera when you've got hostile resistance from the other side. So just a quick side note of how I'm connecting the two. We're just in that new era. If you want something to remain positive about, all you got to do is fast forward to the Gulf Wars and look at how well military members were treated. First responder community is going to come back around. We just got to drink our cup of coffee and wait for that time to come and keep being positive in it. So with that, what I wanted to say, though, is you have to be preparing today and thinking about, okay, granted, I'm going to do my career, but it may not happen that way. And you may be in a position where tomorrow now you're looking for work. And so start doing the little things right now. Make sure a resume's up to date. If it's day one of your career, start the first line of your resume. And then
start performance tracking right now.
Yes. Every time you do something, you go to a training, start documenting it. I would even recommend start keeping a notebook of those experiences that you have. Not the war stories, so to speak, but the situations where you took charge of something and you got something done. You were given a difficult task and you completed that task. Those little things, not that you're going to recount everything, but when it comes time today or tomorrow, maybe you weren't planning for your transition, but now you've got to go in and sell yourself. You've got something that is tangible that you can go, you know what, in this situation, here's what I did. Here's the situation that I faced. And because of X, Y, and Z, I was able to help my team accomplish this. I can do the same thing for your company. As opposed to you're sitting in an interview and they go, well, tell us about something you did. You're thinking, you're like,
No.
well, I know
And
I
then,
did something, you
yeah,
know, it's just those little things, but you're preparing today. Now, if everything goes according to plan, you make it to the end of your career, great. You're that much more prepared. But the one thing you need to be thinking about is these careers offer that unfair potential that tomorrow may be tomorrow without your planning.
absolutely. And I'm a big advocate of performance tracking, mainly because, at our company, we help military, veterans, active duty, identify their project management skill set. And so then when they go and apply for the project management professional exam, like to be authorized to test, they're kind of left wondering, like, okay, I know I've managed projects. I just don't know what I did and who I did it with and what it was for, whatever it may be. So the first tip I would give anybody, regardless if you're going to stay for 20 years or 4, just start recording what you're doing, just like what you said. And I would even go further and include what the project was. Was it external or internal? Who did you work with? What was the result? And grab a reference. Grab a civilian email address that if you need it, you can refer to it. So that's a great tip. That's how you can prepare today for your transition tomorrow. So performance tracking, write down your activities. Okay, what's next, Paul?
Chase what you enjoy doing.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is, yes, there are a lot of cool things that these careers offer us. I was always kind of referred to as the cool nerd because, like I told you, I stumbled into fraud by accident, but I found that I liked the mental challenge of it. But you talk to nine, what's the old saying, 9 out of 10 dentists surveyed. If you
yeah.
talk to 9 out of 10 cops when they were in the academy in that front leaning rest position, the last thing they wanted was a paper case, a tree, top tall. But I found that I enjoyed it. So I went down that rabbit hole. But at the same token, I still like the tactical side of the house. So I've been to SWAT school. I've been on an emergency response team. What I'm getting at is do the fun things. Take the opportunity to work gangs, to work special teams, whatever it is that you have the opportunity to do, but also understand what you're doing. Does it have a transferable skill to the civilian market? You get it. I've talked to EOD guys. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of companies in the civilian world who are looking for people who could blow stuff up or dismantle stuff,
Yeah,
unless
it's
you're going
like
to go towards the law
yeah.
enforcement side of the house.
It's like my husband, he was a weapons loader in the military, and I always joke, like, what's he gonna do? Load bombs for ISIS,
Yeah. So you have to be thinking about that. Now, I'm not saying to never take those opportunities. What I'm saying is maybe you kind of set a time limit for yourself. Hey, you know
Yeah.
what? I'm going to go do this for the next 5 years or whatever it is. But once you get that expertise and you've been there and you've done that and you bought the t-shirt and you start seeing yourself kind of settling into the routine of doing that assignment, maybe that's the time to go, okay, what's my new challenge? What's the new thing that I can go learn and be thinking what skill set maybe makes me a little bit more marketable to the outside world, especially if you're at that tipping point where maybe you've hit that 10-year mark and now you're like, okay, I'm going to do a career, but now I really need to start thinking about what am I going to take from this time into the civilian world?
Yeah, I love that. And, one thing that I often preach is, get a hobby, get a life, experience some things outside of work. That doesn't make you less dedicated. It just makes you more well-rounded. And like, for instance, when I was in the military, I had a couple side hustles. So I was an executive assistant for a couple fitness influencers that are pretty big right now. And I was their little executive assistant in the background when they first started. I learned so many different things. I mean, talk about project management, and, marketing and content creation and stuff like that. I also had those hobbies because I didn't always like what I was doing. And so after work, I had something to look forward to, right? Something that fulfilled my passion and my purpose. But I was also racking up skills. And that's the one of the biggest tips I tell people all the time is start stacking the deck. Stack the deck with education, training, credentials, and then start stacking the deck with your expertise and your skills, right? Every job might not be where you are learning and you're earning because that's the ideal combo. But every job can be where you learn something, whether you learn a skill, you learn effective leadership, or you learn ineffective leadership. So I love that. So performance tracking and then chase what you enjoy. All right. What's another tip?
The one thing I want to key on what you just said,
Yeah.
though. You bring up a great point of, and this is that side connection to your mental health and everything else. Find those hobbies outside of work and chase those to one, just kind of keep you grounded, keep you balanced. My thing is try to come in or try to leave these careers the same person you were when you came in, you know, and they're going to change you no matter what, but try to be more like the old you than 20 or 30 years of these careers. But the other thing you brought up is a really good point too. And this goes back to that networking thing. You start doing some little side hustle. It doesn't make you any money. It's just something you enjoy doing. But who are you going to have the opportunity to meet doing that side hustle? And that person may not benefit you today, but what if they see your work ethic? And like you said, one of those fitness influencers, all of a sudden they get that killer deal and they need a team. And now all of a sudden, maybe they offer you an opportunity that financially is better than what you're currently doing. But if you hadn't just simply put yourself in that spot and just volunteered your time, even if you were making money, you're probably making so little that it's almost volunteering.
Yeah.
But you're investing in yourself for the future. So it's twofold. Put yourself in a hobby right now, and I strongly recommend this. Find something that you enjoy doing that takes you away from these careers, but then the ancillary benefit is you don't know what it's going to benefit you down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we also have to remember too, like there's a lot of identity that comes, with our work and, being law enforcement and military. And then when we leave, we no longer have this rank. We don't feel like we're serving our country. We're not maybe, we don't feel like we're doing something that matters, but, there is utility in, being a present parent and being a community leader and helping your school. And, once you serve the law enforcement world or military, the next thing you do doesn't have to feel less than. It doesn't have to feel less than. It's just a different type of mission, But like for me, I took a work from home job after 4 years in the civilian sector simply because I wanted to be here, regardless if my son wanted to eat breakfast at 6:30 in the morning when he woke up. I wanted to be here just in case he wanted scrambled eggs. And I know that that sounds super trivial, but just the moment that he wakes up, if he thinks to himself, I am hungry and I want a hot breakfast, I know my mom is here. That's why I chose a work from home job and, definitely a different salary and different responsibilities. But don't underestimate the value that you just bring to the people in your life. It doesn't have to be this law enforcement or military mission. Sometimes being a human, being a kind human is the best mission in the world, right? So,
Well, actually, if you think about it this way, think about 20 or 30 years in these careers, military side. If you were constantly deployed, you're not home that much.
yeah.
Law enforcement, I've had buddies who worked homicide. You want to talk about a position that takes you away from home a lot. Talk to every one of them or go beyond them and talk to their families and ask their families, how did their career impact the family? Going to what you were saying, maybe your second career is something where you put your family first. And maybe it's taking that little job, whatever it is, but you make yourself now, my new mission is to make myself more available to my family, to my spouse, to my kids, to my grandkids, whatever it is, that's your new mission. something to think about.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Paul. I mean, people always ask me what my biggest accomplishment is from the military, and I always say that I retired happily married to my husband and that we're still together as a whole family. But when people start asking me, if you knew then what you know now, I automatically tell them, and I don't have regrets. I'm able to look back and I'm able to be optimistic about it. But I automatically tell them, like, I don't care about any of the medals that I ever received, any of the promotions, any of the accolades. I know that the work that I did when I deployed was valuable, but I missed out a lot on my son. My husband was an all-in parent and he worked for a living. Like he was in the military, but we were two totally different airmen because we were both in the Air Force. He went to work, he did what he needed to do, he collected his paycheck, he came home and he served his son. And I truly believe that the amount of time that you put into your children when they're young will determine the amount of time that they put into you when they're older. And if I could do it all over again, I would rather have retired as a tech sergeant or master sergeant instead of a senior master sergeant and have a different relationship with my son. All I can do is go forward. What's the next best step, right? And that's being here just in case he asks for scrambled eggs. So
and that goes back to what we were talking about previously, in that, yes, the careers offer you opportunities for rank promotion, for duty assignments, whatever it is. Take those opportunities, challenge yourself, get the most you can out of these careers. Yes. But at the same token, be thinking about your family and what sacrifices are they making for you to be able to do whatever you're doing. And again, these are one of those things that on the civilian side, they don't necessarily think about this. They don't think about when a soldier's deployed for 18 months. What's the impact to their family? It's always, oh, they were in Afghanistan for 18 months. Yes, very dangerous, horrible mission assignment. But the wife was at home, or the husband was at home, making sure that the scrambled eggs were being made at 6:30 in the morning. And it's not that either one is more important. It's just that we need to be mindful that these careers place a heavy demand on our family. And one of the things that I would try to recommend is, if you can in your career, find a way to make that balance. Like you talked about with your husband. I go to work, I do my job, I go home.
yeah,
To a degree, there's nothing wrong with that.
there's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
I can tell you, as a detective or as a supervisor, it was nothing for me to be deep into an investigation, and not necessarily because there was a time crunch, like, hey, I've got to get this done. Because there were those times. There were those times where, as a commander, the assistant chief the chief would call at 4:00 and go, I've got a presentation to the board of supervisors. I need X, Y, and Z. We're staying until we have it. Those come up. But it was just me making the decision to keep calling witnesses, or, hey, I'm going to go check out this address, as opposed to, let me just go home to my family, when you have that option.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talked about performance tracking and making sure that we're always kind of preparing in some way, shape, or form for the future, right? So maybe that's the additional duties that we take on, or the extra jobs, or the next steps, the pivots in our career. And then we talked about chasing what we enjoy doing and having some sort of, hobbies or side hustles or something, right? That kind of sets our soul on fire when we're not working. And then just really considering, what matters and who matters. And if you don't have a family, I used to always hate it when people who had kids were always considered first. But people who are single and who have families or just hobbies or friends, they need to be considered as well. So, when I was retiring, we were knee deep, my husband and I were knee deep into when we retire, we're going to do this, right? And my husband is 100% living out exactly what he said he was going to do. And I feel like I am as well. So what do you say to people in law enforcement or the military, or anyone that is about to retire or about to separate? They're taking on this new career transition. What do you say to them about living their life now? And I ask this question with this in mind. I talk to veterans every single day and they tell me, I always ask them, why are you separating? Why are you retiring? And they'll say, because I want this, I want that, I want to do this, I want to do that. I talk to them a year later, and guess what? They're not doing this, they're not doing that. And they're basically doing the same thing, except they're just not wearing a uniform. So what would you say to people that are going through that?
First and most important is understand that when you step away from these careers, you are going to have a sense of loss of identity.
Mm.
You need to start embracing that before you get out. I would even recommend work on going back to that analogy that I said of try to leave these careers the same person you were when you walked in. Try to really strike that balance of that's just my job. What I always tell people is when I meet them and they find out that I was a cop and they immediately want to start talking war stories. I use the analogy though, if you ever been to a party and met somebody who was a plumber, there's never stories of a clogged toilet. They don't want to talk about it. And I understand that
I love it. Yeah.
our careers are interesting to people, but what I'm getting at is be the plumber. Be the plumber who doesn't walk around with a monkey wrench when he's not working. He doesn't want to hear about your clogged toilet or your broken shower. It's not a topic of concern for him. So the first thing is start working on being more you when you're not working and not be the job. The other thing is have a realistic plan for what you're going to do post these careers. One of the things I think a lot of people do, and I saw this in my 35 years of law enforcement, is the plan is just the retirement gate. I want to get to retirement. And when you ask, well, what are you going to, oh, I'm going to travel. I've met, I could probably count them on one hand, the people who are actually just doing that thing where like they're getting in the motorhome and you see them through social media and you're like, all right, that person's doing it. But for the most part, most just kind of like you said, they end up just sitting at home or whatever. They're not doing what they plan to do. I'm not saying don't make a plan. What I'm saying is make a realistic plan.
Yeah.
I'll put myself as an example. I could have sat there and said, hey, you know what? When I retire, I want to go travel. My wife is 12 years younger than me and still works. She doesn't have unlimited vacation time. She can't traipse around the country with me traveling or traipse around the world. At the same token, I'm not in a financial place where I could afford to do that. It takes a lot of money to live out of a suitcase or live on the road. So I would say have a realistic plan. And the last thing I would say is, and this goes back to what we were talking about before, we spent 20 or 30 years in these jobs, and these jobs are very mission focused. One thing that we are great at doing, give us a task and we're going to accomplish it. The worst thing for us is downtime or idle time. That's when we get in trouble. That's when we break things. That's when we cause problems because we like to be doing things. When you retire, you need to have that next mission. You need to have that next thing that when you wake up in the morning, that's what you're excited to go do, whatever it is. If it is, hey, you know what? I'm 100% into giving back to my family. Great. But have that new mission. Be clear in what drives you each day.
Absolutely. And I tell people all the time, regardless of their affiliation with whatever law enforcement, military, whatever, but as we grow older, I'm 46. As we grow older, we learn truly what really is important, especially in the world today. The COVID, the pandemic taught us, I mean, there's a lot of unrest in society today. We've had a string of, shooting deaths here in Sumter, drive-bys and stuff like that. And it just makes you realize that it's time to adjust our ruler. When we talk about our ruler, we're talking about the measurement of success. And so when we leave our jobs, our careers, or when you grow a year older, it's time to adjust the ruler. Like my definition of success no longer revolves around awards, promotions, my duty title, whatever it may be, the money in my bank, nothing. It really revolves around, is my son optimistic? Is he emotionally intelligent? Are we still married? That's something that my parents are divorced, and of course, there's always consequences of that on the family. And my husband and I, we want to make sure that that's not a part of our son's story. So we work really hard on our marriage. adjust the ruler. What is your definition of success? What's your definition of lazy? What's your definition of this, And that really helps with imposter syndrome. It helps being able to scroll social media and laugh and not compare myself to others, And it also allows you to put what's really important according to you at the forefront. So I always say adjust your ruler.
That remeasuring your definition of success is, I think, a huge thing to do. Yeah. You can't, I don't want to say you can't. So when I retired, I had this idea that this consulting company was going to explode. One of the things that I'll say is, whatever you're thinking about doing in your transition career, you have to do something that, if you can, maybe you can get it going before you retire, so that you've already gone through those little hurdles of getting it up and running. For me, I targeted a consulting company that was going to be working with clients who want to get their products in front of government agencies, law enforcement, whatever. I had a conflict of interest in trying to start that company while I was still working. So something like that, I wish I would have known 5 years earlier, that not even 5 years, a couple years earlier, because I was thinking that as soon as I hung my shingle and had my LLC, that business would start pouring in. My mentor in the business has been doing it for 30 plus years. He's established that name recognition so that new clients are coming to him by word of mouth. I now have to go through that working process of establishing myself with clients, maybe taking a little bit less than what I think I'm valued at to get that word of mouth aspect of it. But where I'm going with this is that transition piece is where you want to end up. Have a goal. You can't sit there and say, well, I'll just let it happen. Because like you said, you're going to probably end up being lazy, just kind of sitting on the couch. Yeah. Set that mountaintop goal for wherever you want to get to, but also understand, once you start climbing that mountain, if you're making progress, you can slow it down a little bit. If you find that, you know what, I don't want to work this hard. Man, I'm retired. I don't want to be out 60 hours a week. So I'm going to take a little bit less. Maybe I'm not going to make as much money, but I'm going to have more time at home. Or, man, this is what I thought I wanted to do. I got into it. Don't feel like you're stuck and say, well, this is where I set all my, put all my eggs in that basket. I want to get there. You find out, man, that's really not what I want to do. Follow that passion, follow your heart, see what's really driving you. Don't think of, oh man, I'm going to do another 20 years in a career that I don't really like. Yeah. So yeah, really kind of resetting that ruler, or resetting the measurement, is important, because you really want to spend these next 20 or 30 years, whatever it is, being happy.
Absolutely. And plus we're older, right? So we know now, we know all these things that we have lessons learned. We've made the big mistakes. And most of the time hopefully we're not going to make big mistakes or poor decisions, in this part of our life. But one thing that you said was, have a plan and then work towards that plan. I always encourage people, regardless of what you're doing, is take it 1 year at a time. People will ask in an interview question, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? And my answer always is, I don't live like that. I live 1 year at a time. So for this 1 year, this is my definition of success. This is what I would like to achieve. And here's why. I think having the why is important. Why do I want to run a 4-hour marathon? For me, that's not, I just want to run the marathon. So having a why behind it is important, but 1 year at a time.
Because it's faster than 5.
Yeah, true. Because the course closes at 6, I think. So. But the 1 year, and this really helped me when I transitioned, because unless you're dealing with something that obviously is unethical, immoral, or illegal, for the most part, you can endure a year. The year you see the evolution of something. Like for me, if I went into the corporate world, 1 year opened my eyes up to the onboarding process, the training process, the performance eval process, the promotion process. So in 1 year, I got to see the true evolution of the company. I also got to see highs and lows, like when we're performing, what happens in the company, when we're not performing, what happens in the company. So then after a year, you are educated to make a sound decision about the next step. And we are no longer in the era where we're staying at a job for 4 to 5 years because our mental health is way too important. And sometimes what we're doing is not filling up our cup, right? And so I always say now, like I have choices. When I was at my other company, before I went full time with Vets to PM, they were like, hey, we want to put you in succession training to be an executive, but you have to go away to Germany for a year. But nope, not leaving my family again. Would that be great to make 6 figures, more than 6 figures? Absolutely. But 6 figure salary requires 6 figure work. And that is not where I'm at in my life anymore. So I have choices. So taking it a year at a time can help with what you were talking about as well. So any other tips, to help us prepare today for our transition tomorrow? Anything that stands out maybe from your podcast or from your experience?
For me, one of the most important things that I've learned in talking to all of my guests is don't make these careers your identity. Don't be all in the sense of this is all you are. Commit to these careers. Yes. Have fun, enjoy them, take every opportunity that you can, but also understand at the end of the day, you're just you, and make sure that you is equally important. And with that, don't, and I, I hate saying this because we've all met those people and I'm not trying to insult anybody, but don't be the used to be. Don't be that person that walks into the job and all you are is the stories of what you used to do. Granted, you're going to find some people that want to hear some of your stories, but put that behind you. Pull out the story every once in a while to add something to the conversation, but don't just live on this is what I used to do. Nobody really wants that. And you're really going to alienate yourself more than endear yourself to anybody. So do these jobs, have fun, but don't make them your identity, because you are going to take off that uniform at the end of these careers and it is going to get hung up in the closet. And no matter how many plaques or pictures or anything you put on the wall, they're all collecting dust. And that train is still moving at 100 miles an hour. And guess what? All you're doing is waving. So find something that makes you you outside of these careers. And then when you move into that next career, whatever it is, and I love your analogy of do it for a year, see if you like it or not. Go head first into that job and just be the new team guy. What do you need me to do? How can I help you, as opposed to, hey, you remember what I used to do? So those are two big things for me.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because I'm really like, I'm a big, most people, and from the military perspective, most people who separate and most people who retire are doing it way prior than we have to. So we have certain times where we have to retire. Like I retired 8 years prior to having to. So why did you separate? Why did you retire? So that why has to be strong and it has to be on the forefront. And stop ruminating. I tell people this all the time. I don't want to hear about it. People ask me, and I think it's just a general curiosity, especially if you tell them, I would probably want to sit down with you, have a cup of coffee and talk, right? But when you share people that you've been to Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever, of course, there's this curiosity. But I don't ruminate. I don't ruminate in life. Like my husband and I, we're believers where we say, what happened yesterday is what happened yesterday. So we're not ruminating on, what could have been or what was when or what, we got to move on because ruminating is actually not very healthy. Like even therapists say it. Okay, you've told me what happened in your childhood. Now what? Right? So what? Now what? Let's get over it. Not, well, I shouldn't say that. Not get over it, but you know what I mean? Let's move on. You made a conscious choice to separate or retire or leave your, law enforcement career. You're so much more, and the veteran community does not like what I'm about to say, Paul, but I always say you are so much more than your veteran status. You are so much more than your veteran status. What do you say to that?
The analogy that I heard and I think this nails it, is imagine getting into a relationship today and the person that you're dating, potentially getting married, whatever, all they did was talk about the last person they were dating.
Mm.
Imagine how you'd feel after a while of, I'm sick and tired of hearing about all the cool things that your ex did, or because we tend to always fondly, we don't talk about, man, I hated being awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and having to
Oh,
write
yeah.
that report. That's not what we talk about. We always talk about the fond things. But imagine if you were in a dating relationship and the person that you were with, all they talked about is their ex. That's kind of how we sound when we're constantly bringing up the used to be's. My wife will hit me up all the time. I'll go into because the one thing is, 20 or 30 years in these careers, people peg us. There's no way around it.
Oh, yeah.
You're military vet, and I'll go in some places and they'll go, hey, are you, a veteran or first responder? And I'll go, no. Oh, okay. We give discount. I don't care.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that you think that. I really try to deflect it, because again, we are more than that uniform or our rank or what our status was.
Yes, absolutely. My son, he's 17. He said the most emotionally intelligent thing the other day. He is having a hard time with someone, an adult in his life that obviously impacts, the like his career as far as a football player. And so he's having this difficult time with him. And, he came home and he told me about this really good moment that he had with this person. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. Like, I'm really glad that you had that moment. And he looked at me and he's like, but that's not going to make me forget the entire year. I can't let good moments impact my decision making, you know, and and I was like, wow, that's pretty profound for a 17-year-old. And I think a lot of us do the same thing with our military careers. I had a friend the other day and he was ruminating and blah blah blah. And I finally asked him, I said, hey, I'd like to give you some feedback if you're open to it. And he's like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, you and I spent 20 years in the military and you were witching and complaining about the military. And now we're in the civilian sector together. And now you're witching and complaining about the civilian sector. So what is it? Are you a happy person with sad moments, or are you a sad person with happy moments? Like, what are we doing here? Like, we get to live every day. Like when I woke up today, thank you, thank you. Thanks for letting me get up today, because not everybody has that opportunity. So
Take the small wins in life, and that's a key thing too. There are just going to be people around us. Doesn't matter how perfect something is, they're going to find something to complain about.
yeah.
Those are those people. I would say if you see yourself being that way, go talk to somebody, because that's not healthy. That's not healthy to never be able to find something positive in your life. If you had these careers taken from you, like you mentioned, maybe you got out earlier than your max. And if you, to a degree, regret it, okay, it was a bad decision. But I'll use myself as an example. When I got divorced, and I remember going and talking to a therapist, and I was really focusing on my children. And the therapist told me, it's like, getting divorced wasn't the wrong decision for your children, but understand this: every decision you make after this could be a wrong decision for your children. Where I'm bringing this
Wow.
around is, okay, maybe you stepped away from this career sooner than you thought you wanted to. It is what it is. You can't go backwards and fix or change the past. Start focusing on how you can make the best future you can.
Absolutely. So, Paul, as we close out, how are you focusing on the best future that you can have? What are things that you do? What fills your day?
I'm continuing to push forward with the podcast. Obviously, it fills a part of my soul, the
Yeah.
opportunity to sit and meet, just like our conversation now, getting to meet new people and have conversations with them are what feeds inside of me. I'm still young at heart. I still want to work. So I'm sticking irons in the fire and seeing what that the whole bubble of what works best for my life. Yes, now that I'm almost a year retired, I like the idea of making my home my base. So
Mm.
what can I work that I can do it from here. I've got a new opportunity that's arising again from networking. Somebody that I was networked with who reached out to me and said, would you be interested in doing some training? Okay, yeah, I'm interested in that. Those opportunities that will come. I wasn't looking to be a PI, a private investigator, but I've got some friends who are in the personal security space. So I've since gone out and gotten my certification to do armed private security work, more like high-end executive type protection.
Yeah.
Not because that was my goal. It was because the opportunity presented itself. And I'm like, let me see what that does. But again, those are careers that I've now been able to say, I'm going to do them from home. I've had opportunities come my way for executive level leadership, like you were saying in the corporate world, but they want me to drive to LA every day. Yeah. It for me, it doesn't work, but I put pieces in place before I retired so that I could make those decisions today where I'm not forced to, yeah, I've got to take that job, So for me, it's trying to grow the podcast, trying to keep that going to the point where maybe the podcast can be the primary source of income. It's a slow process for anybody who wants to start a podcast, but if you have questions, I'll definitely, give you any advice I can. And until then, just keep poking at that fire, and who knows, I might find something that like, oh, wow, I really like doing this, and go down that route.
Yeah. Such a good point too. And like, when you say maybe this podcast will be, my main source of income, is like, sometimes we also forget that there's the bottom of the pyramid. So like doing a podcast is the top of the pyramid, right? Mentoring veterans is the top of the pyramid, but the bottom of the pyramid, all those things, all those small things, that's sometimes what makes work maybe unenjoyable, but it's necessary, right? And so one thing that I always say to veterans is like, I don't care what anyone says, I will prove you wrong, but there is absolutely no dream job. But there are aspects of dream jobs in whatever it is that you choose to do. So, what I'm doing right now, there's aspects of the dream job. My side hustle, aspects of the dream job. Reading 5 books a week, like those are aspects of a dream job. If someone could just pay me to read books and review, just bring it on. Bring it on. So yeah, now we have choices, right? And what we do though today is going to prepare us for our transition tomorrow. So just to kind of recap what you said, because it's great tips. Start networking, building your community, work on those peripherals. For the military, I always say, get the education, get the training, stack the deck, right? Some of those peripherals might be, make sure that you have a good 3-6 months in the bank. And nowadays that is pretty tough, but whatever that looks like to you. So that way, just like what you said, we don't have to say yes to things that we don't really want to do. Start performance tracking so you can build your resume, and chase what you enjoy doing, what you want to do. I told my son, I don't want you to go to school for computer information systems or computer science because you think that it's going to be a good career. You don't like computers. So what are we doing here? Chase what you like to do. So any last rounds, Paul? Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
You are a mentor, like you described. Regardless of what you're doing after you walk away from these careers, you're still a mentor. Every opportunity you can to try to help somebody newer than you, younger than you, whatever, be that mentor for them. Point out the negatives when you need to point out the negatives, point out the positives when you need to point out the positives. I've stepped away from law enforcement. I loved doing it for 35 years. It's something that if I was doing it over again today, I would do it again. Don't get mired in the, yes, it's different. When you came into the military, it was different than somebody coming into the military today. Things change. You can't measure it by the past. You can only measure it by what you have going forward. Be that solid mentor for somebody and guide them into the right way to do the job.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, where can we listen to your podcast and find you and connect with you? If someone wants to reach out, how do they find you?
So the podcast is Transition Drill. It's on all major platforms. It's on YouTube, so you can watch or listen to it. And I would love a follow, a like, comment, anything that kind of helps me keep pushing it forward. If there's something that they would like to hear me talk about or a guest that I could try to get, I'm always looking for guest recommendations, but the one limitation is I do all my interviews in person. So they've got to be in the Southern California area.
That's a good boundary. I love that boundary.
Hey, an hour north of San Diego, I have a plethora of Marines and Navy. Trying to find Air Force and Army is a little difficult. I'm still hoping to find my first PJ. I'd love to talk to a PJ.
I think I know a couple. Look
If
at
they're
here. All right,
if they're
look
in the
at
Southern
this network
California area.
here. Well, Paul, thank you so much for helping our community. You know, obviously there are a lot of parallels between law enforcement and, you know, the veteran community, but from one American to another, thank you so much for what you've done for your community and what you've done for our country. You're not respected enough, and I know that you know, your community has a lot of trials and tribulations that they have to face every single day. And there's always exceptions to the rule, right? We don't have perfect law enforcement out there, but most are fantastic. Most are volunteering. Most want to help our country. So from one American to another, thank you so much for what you do for, you know, our country, what you do for your community, and what you've done for ours today. Thanks, Paul.
I would mirror the same comment, and thank you for your time and for the invite.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Military Transition Academy podcast. If you found today's episode helpful, please share it with your fellow veterans and friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Please connect with Paul on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Transition Drill podcast wherever you listen. Get plugged into the Vets2PM network at vets2pm.com/training. Take care and talk to you soon.